should buy house and land packages. We are meant to build 1 million houses in the next 5 years. The people that should buy a house and land package are the people that want to love to live in a house and land location. So if you go to Schofields and you're like, wow, I love the open scenery. I love that there's, I love that there's a Costco just around the corner. Then absolutely, you should go out and do that. But as an investor, our goal is to make the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time with the least amount of risk and not get in trouble with these type of...
For the buyer brief, isn't it, Joe? Isn't that the end
to match the buyer brief? Yes, it is. But you don't want to be buying these type of assets because they're not in high growth. They're not necessarily in high growth locations. And there are some house and land packages that are in infill locations. So that's something to look out for as well. But for me, when I look at investing, I'm not trying to gobble up all the information and put everything on my plate. I've got like a reductionist type of investment strategy where house and land packages, I know 98% of them are rubbish and that 2% are going to be really, really good investments. So what I'm just going to do is remove 100% of them off my plate, then remove off the plan apartments, and then remove properties that are out of my price range, then remove properties out of my yield range, then remove properties out of the states that I don't want to buy in. And all of a sudden, you've got such a narrow scope for your investment to focus on, and you can dive into those markets a little bit more to get those investment returns.
Especially if you're new, right, Joe? Like if you're new and this is your first or second property, like that is the exact right approach you should take. If you already got 10 under your belt, then maybe you can try extract value from the 2%. But like whenever you hear growth corridors, that doesn't mean that corridor is going to grow in value. It means there's more population coming into that growth corridor. How does population get there? It's like because there's more houses. Who projects or who predicts and makes these forecasts for population? It's the local council based on how many building approvals, how many developers are approaching them to build house and land packages. So it's almost like supply is dictating the demand forecast. If that's happening, then supply and demand are always going to be balanced.
Retiring, being financially free in 10 years. So the way I'm going to frame this particular one, because a lot of people sort of talk about this, is if you think that an average sort of salary just ticking along, being going to be financially free in 10 years, I think that's a wrong reason to be investing in this type of asset. I think the average sort of person do it in 10 years is probably not going to do it. It's going to be very hard for them. So what are your thoughts on that, PK?
Yeah, like like people, because they don't like their 9 to 5, they like they're feeling pain in their current lifestyle environment and atmosphere. They sort of look for a escape. They look for a panacea. And then when they start seeing lots of Facebook ads and like testimonials of people achieving what they want to achieve, that their confirmation bias starts kicking in. They're like, yeah, well, I didn't believe it the first Facebook ad. I didn't believe it the first YouTube ad, but now I'm like bombarded. Like maybe it is possible. And this guy is saying it's possible. And this guy is on a golf course while recording the 30-second, what do you call it?
We've all seen that.
The guy or the girl. Because women play golf and they play it very well too. They also,
you know what I mean? So it's like their brain kind of tells them like yes, and then they'll have a conversation with their husband or wife or whatever, and like they get lured into this kind of dark alleyway, and then they get effectively mugged. Like that is effectively what's happening, right? They're getting mugged.
Sounds horrible, PK. Like I mean,
well, I tell you what's worse is getting mugged is only a one-time thing, and it hurts a little bit. You lose what's in your wallet. But when you get taken advantage of by these kind of spruikers that have these crazy 10-year retirement plans, you're getting mugged of your life savings. So I'd much rather be mugged in the short term and get hit like that than what actually happens when you go through these.
Neither. My option there is option C. I don't want either of those. Yeah.
I'm even seeing posts about people that are saying retire with property in 3 years. Guys, when you buy a property, nothing changes in your life. When you buy a second property, nothing changes in your life. When you have a third, 3 years in, 5 years in, nothing changes. It pretty much stays the same, except you've got a little bit of admin on the back end that you have to work with, but it takes a long time to build up substantial wealth within property. There's no quick win and easy fixes. And anyone that says you can retire in 10 years, it really depends. You can retire if you have $2 million and you leverage up to 80%, you can probably retire in 10 years. I think you could do some smart decisions, get involved with some developments, do some joint ventures, and you could build up that wealth base to then capitalize and then get out in 10 years.
So basically what Joe's saying is you have to, if you want to get financially free in 10 years of property, you have to work. You can't just buy property and expect to be financially free in 10 years.
Because retirement means cash flow, right? It doesn't mean like 5 million in the bank. It means cash flow, yearly 100K or 150K. And I don't think what people realize, obviously you guys know, right, that property is a pretty terrible yielding asset. Like it yields pretty terrible.
As a net, yeah.
6% gross yield is considered to be good. Net, that's like not much at all, especially with current interest rates. And so what's the only attractive thing about property? Sorry, not the only, but one of the most attractive thing about property is the ability to leverage. The more you leverage, the more good debt you take, the more properties you own. In 20 years, 15 years, whatever, you can sell some and be debt free. Then that's when the cash flow boosts. It's like a hockey stick because there's no debt on it. But to be able to get that many properties, you need income, right? You need to be able to service the borrowing capacity. So I think like it's very easy to say like 10 properties in 10 years. Like, yeah, that's great. But most people can't get past 2 or 3 properties in the first 2 or 3 years. Like it takes them another 3 years to be able to work their LVR down, get their cash flow, they get promoted in their career, then they can get their 4th one. So it takes like, I don't know, what's your experience, Joe? Like, I probably think it takes 10 years to even, pass through the acquisition phase of a person.
I would say so. So I'll share my screen right now, and I don't know how well this is going to go because I don't know how visually. No, we're not going to role play, but this is a platform that I use to go through strategy sessions with people around building out properties. So just a high level quick set. So this is an average person on an average salary, and we are purchasing 5 properties. These addresses are fake, so ignore them. We are purchasing 5 properties over 5 years. And over here is the equity position. So the value of the property. So you can see here, as we are buying throughout the years, the equity and value increases. But you can see here is the cash flow. So you can see -10, -12, -15. That yellow is the target, and the green is what we're looking to get to. But it takes 5 acquisitions at 5% growth and 5% yield. So on average, property has grown about 6.9%. Year on year, but if we win at the lowest level, we'll win in a better environment.
For those watching the podcast, I'm sorry about you can imagine a whole bunch of really sexy graphs on a screen.
Yeah, very sexy graphs, very sexy charts. But you can see in 10 years, this is starting pretty much from having two properties already and ending up with 5. That in 10 years' time, we'll have $4 million portfolio. But we'll still be negative. We'll have $20,000 in cash flow. It's going to take us until 2024 to hit our goal. But this is where the value of property grows. So at 2042, we're going to have a $6 million portfolio, and in 30 years' time, we'll have a $10 million portfolio.
What are the assumptions on that growth? Is that a 5% growth or what?
5% growth rate, 5% yield. Rent increases at 5%, 92% occupancy rate, interest rates at 5%. So that's average throughout the entire time. Inflation at 2.5. You can increase and decrease as you go along. But there's a couple of basic assumptions. But here is one of the most important charts because I've kind of forced this. This is the borrowing capacity. So a person on this type of salary would actually not be able to purchase this many properties because their borrowing capacity and their debt to income ratio would be overextended. So you would actually have to spread this out between the next 10 years, like PK was saying, to acquire them so your debt to income ratio doesn't over.
Rent investing. helps you create financial freedom. I'm interested in your thoughts on this one, because how doesn't it not, PK? Like, why should, if you think that, why shouldn't you be buying property?
Well, before we go into that, PK, can you explain what rent vesting is?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just give a high level overview for people that don't know what rent vesting is, and that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So I think rent vesting is, I did it myself. So it's like when you rent for a period of time, simultaneously using your savings to buy investment properties. So you could have like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 investment properties whilst at the same time renting. So it's like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just buy your own home if you've got all that cash, right? The whole theory behind rent vesting is that in that way, you only have good debt. You only have deductible debt. And deductible debt is generally better for your borrowing capacity than bad debt. In other words, non-deductible debt. Your borrowing capacity is stretched by having investment properties as opposed to your PPOR. So that's kind of the theory behind it. And a lot of people who, like let's say in Sydney or Melbourne, and they're like, I want to buy something for 1.5 million, and right now I don't have as much as that to be able to get it. Instead, I'm going to put my funds to use. I'm going to use my money, put it to work, and that way in the future I can get a passive income and a PPR that I want to live in. That's what rent vesting is.
And just to tack on to the end of that, it's you live in the lifestyle location that you want to live in by renting there, because you can't afford to buy there. So I live in Cronulla. If I want to live in a house in Cronulla, I need $3 million. So I'm going to instead invest in properties around Australia to build up a portfolio that I can then, like I see this all the time. We've got investors that don't care about investing. They just want to buy a house in Sydney. So they have to go out there. They say, I realize with a salary of 100 grand, my wife with 80, if we continue down this trajectory and prices keep going up, we're not going to be able to afford. So we have to build a portfolio. Then I want to sell that portfolio down to be able to afford a house in Sydney. But essentially you rent in a lifestyle location that you'd love to live in, and that allows you to invest the capital that you have in a market that may be growing. Because what are the chances that the best location to be buying in is the one that you're sitting in? Probably pretty low. So that sounds positive though. Like I thought we're looking at why we shouldn't be buying.
Yeah, it was hard to argue against it because like the house that I'm sitting in right now.
Did I mess that up? Should that have been the other way?
Rent vesting at its best is when you live at home. It's the best version of rent vesting. Absolutely. Sorry, go on, PK.
No, I was just saying that I think rent vesting is becoming more difficult. Let me know what you guys think as well, because I don't have like concrete data to prove this, but rent vesting is becoming more difficult going forward as opposed to the last 5 or 10 years. And I think one reason is that in the last 5 or 10 years, rents. Have you seen that stat where it said like rents have risen by like maybe even 20 to 30% in the last 10 years? Yeah. Whereas like in the last year and probably for the next 1 or 2 years, they're going to rise by, I don't know, like 30, 40%. Yeah. So rent vesting works, but if that lifestyle location that you want to live in, Bondi or Manly or whatever it is, like your rent is going that much higher, then there comes a point where it's actually cheaper to buy than to rent, in which case rent vesting, like the math, and everyone should actually do the math, it doesn't add up anymore. There's a threshold, if rents are X, rent vesting works for the next 5 years, 10 years. If rents are X plus Y, like the arithmetic just doesn't add up anymore. And I think we're getting to that, not in every location and every situation, but in some instances. Pay off your mortgage in 7 to 10 years. So let's say you've got a mortgage, you've got that's $500,000 of debt. All right, you want to try to pay that 500K off. To do that, what you need to find is perhaps 3 properties, maybe 4 properties that will double in value in that 7 to 10 year period, by which you can, in that time frame or after that time frame, sell them and then use that cash, that profit, you could say, after tax, to pay off your principal place of residence. Like the theory, like what I've just said, It probably entices people and be like, yeah, I can do that. Like that's entirely possible. And probably a lot of listeners have actually done it.
Think of the tax you're going to pay though, PK. What about the tax? Like how much capital gains? Like how much are you just throwing down the?
Well, that's the thing. Like there's a few things that make it hard and make this kind of sentence a little bit clickbaity, and I'm guilty of it as well. The first thing is exactly what you've said, that you'll be paying capital gains tax. Of course, you get the 50% discount, and it depends which structure and etc. that you buy in. But yeah, it's not quite as simple as that. You're paying tax when you sell the property. The other thing is that, and you know, Joe, you asked Jeff this exact question: which hurts your borrowing capacity more, PPOR or an investment property? You've already got a PPOR debt in this example. You've already got non-deductible bad debt. So your ability, and I'm just talking for the average person, I'm not talking about the person who makes like 300K a year. The average person who makes like under 100K a year, maybe household income 150, like they've got $500,000 of bad debt on their PPR. They can't even borrow enough to get those 3 to 4 investment properties by which they will double in 7 to 10 years time. They'll sell a couple to pay the 500K PPR debt off. Like the borrowing capacity is what limits this strategy. But on a piece of paper, it's very simple, right? Buy 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's one thing. That's the second thing. The third thing that makes this a little bit of a spooky statement is that the ability to create a deposit to actually buy 4 investment properties or 3 investment properties to be able to execute that 10-year strategy, like that's a struggle. You know, interest rates are rising. I honestly don't think interest rates will rise much more than what they have at the moment, maybe 1 or 2 more rate rises. But notwithstanding that, they're higher than what they were before. And so how are people going to not only pay principal and interest, or even interest only on their PPOR, simultaneously have these 4 investment properties, you know, that are, you know, yes, you can buy neutrally geared properties, but you need 20% deposit for that in this day and age. How are people going to come up with, you know, let's say $60,000, $70,000 deposit every single time in the next 1 or 2 years? Because remember that the strategy is based on holding the properties for them to double in 7 to 10 years. That means you need to buy them ASAP. Like you can't spread that acquisition over 5 or 7 years. You need to buy them like in the first year, the second year, for them to be able to double in 7 to 10 years. So, you know, like you're talking 60, 70,000 times 4, you know, for a deposit, like that $160,000, $200,000 deposit. Like if you had that, then you just use that to pay half your principal place debt off anyway. Right. So like, do you know what I'm saying? Like 1, 2, 3, those 3 like really make it difficult in this. I'm not saying it's impossible, and, you know, individual circumstances will allow it. I just think it's not something that people should say, I saw an ad, I saw someone do it 2 years ago, therefore I'm putting all my eggs in this strategy.
Yeah. And I think to be able to do it, you really have to be running an active strategy. There's no passivity in being able to do this. You need to be running, if you want to make it do it via property, you need to be doing subdivisions, renovations, developments, doing active stuff that is growing value, and then selling and then refinancing to be able to then move your money and pay down. Like there's no easy win for this game, unfortunately.
Is a bad property in a good suburb better than a good property in a bad suburb? That's
that's a great question.
It's like a kind of back to forth. Like, what if, PK, you want to answer this first, or you want to go last on this one?
Oh, I'll go last. Joe or Jeff, either of you could go ahead.
I love this one. A bad property in a good suburb is by far the better way to go. Definitely go that route. Do not get a good property in a terrible location, because location does 80% of the heavy lifting. Go to a location. Like if you can get a terrible, like if all you can afford is the worst property on the best street, then go for that. If you can afford like a slightly better one, I would say probably go the slightly better one. But it really depends on how active you want to be. If this place is falling down and you need to spend $100,000 on a renovation, maybe skip it. But if you can spend $20,000 and then that's going to grow the value by $60,000, you're putting in $1 and you're getting back 3. So it's totally worthwhile. But if you buy in a bad suburb, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Do buy the worst property on the best street rather than the best property on the worst street.
I think before we throw across to PK, I'll echo largely your thoughts. So originally, I was like, like what happens if it really comes down to your budget as well, because if you're looking at a bad property in a good suburb, if the good suburb is Mossman, for example, a bad property there is still going to cost you, like, let's just say maybe it's a unit. You're still spending 800,000 or 900,000, maybe a bit more for a unit. And then if that underperforms that area, I mean, maybe then are you going to get pulled up? So you're not buying Mossman, you're buying that particular property in that suburb. So I mean, I think it's a very it's a complex question. It's a very good one, and it's an important one as well. So I think buying a slightly below average in a good suburb is better, but buying a bad or the worst is maybe a little too simple. Thoughts, PK?
Yeah, no, I have the same. It's like Adelaide has boomed. People who may not be educated or just started to think about property, they're like, oh, Adelaide, like, that's the place to buy. And then they're like, oh, damn, I can't find anything under 400. And then like, hang on, like, Elizabeth, like Elizabeth, I can still find. They're like, oh, cool, capital city under 400, Elizabeth. But it's like, maybe famous last words, but there are more premium, nicer areas in a place like Mount Gambier, although that's regional, that I would put my money under 400 as opposed to Elizabeth. So it just comes down to like exactly what you guys said.